The Dialed In Angling Podcast, brought to you by Strike Master Augers, Onyx Fish, St. Croix Rods, the Minnesota DNR Life Safety. This week on the Dialed In Angling Podcast, we're going to be discussing everything panfish, sort of the state of the state where we're at as far as ice conditions, ice safety. But first, I want to introduce my guest, Mike Hehner. He's from Linder Media Productions. This guy is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to fishing in general. Mike and I have been great friends for a long time. Mike is very influential, I would say, in the panfish work groups. He's been a rock star when it comes to the Quality Panfish Initiative. Mike Hehner, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. Good to be with you, Tony.
Hey, I appreciate you being on, Mike. You and I talk on the phone all the time. Everything when it comes to fishing, just catching up. Sometimes we don't talk for months at a time, but generally when we get on a call, you and I gab away about ice fishing, pan fishing, open water, whatever the season may be. I always love talking to you, and I'm glad to have you on the show.
It should be fun. Panfish is sort of my I like fishing everything, obviously, like you, but panfish is sort of my passion, and it's been kind of fun working, in a group to be able to try to make, pan fishing better in our state. And I, based on our conversations, we both think it's doing okay anyhow, right? Or doing pretty good. So
yeah, I would say, just the state of the state when it comes to pan fishing in general, I would say we're in a better spot than we were 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I mean, I'd love to see these, I wouldn't even call them experimental restrictions anymore. I would just say these reduced bag limits. I think they're still in the experimental phase, but honestly, I think they're working. You and I have talked. I know it's been probably 3 years of little or no ice. Well, I shouldn't say little or no ice, but 3 years of, let's just back it up, 2 years of snow. And then last year with little or no ice, the fishing pressure has gone way down in especially a lot of these backwoods panfish lakes. But I think it's more than that. I think it's a culmination of a lot of things. You have reduced pressure, but then you have this Quality Panfish Initiative that hit a few years back. Can you give us a little bit of insight on how that started, your role in that, the Panfish Works Group's role in that? I love seeing it. I seek out those lakes that have those reduced bag limits because I know I can catch quality panfish on those bodies of water.
Yeah, no, I've been interested in it for quite a while, and I've been in the group now for I want to say 9 or 10 years, and it had started way before that. And so when I came in, there was already a smaller group of people involved in it, and a couple influential guys, Ed Fusi from Pomoosh Lake Resort up there, and then Dave Thompson, who has a place over on Deer Lake in Ottertail County. And those guys were on the panfish earlier, and they were there when they first started talking about reducing bags in sunfish. And for people who don't know, like, it wasn't that long ago you could keep 30 bluegills, 30 sunfish, and they were sort of on the front end of getting it reduced from 30 to 20. And I guess back then, there was, Ed told me he had notes on his, windshield of his truck when he came out of the meeting with angry people about trying to reduce the bag. And now, here we are, 2025, and we've got lakes that you can only keep 5 bluegill. So I'd say we've come a long ways, and it's been fun to get there and to see how, the science behind why they think they need to do it, the DNR, but also seeing people's attitudes change from totally not wanting to be on board to, people on other lakes saying, hey, I see the lake across the street from me's got these special bluegill or sunfish regs, and can we put them on our lake too? Because we see that they're working. So that's kind of been, fun to see and refreshing. So,
yeah, I think change, anglers in particular, sometimes we're stuck in our ways and we don't like change. But where we're at in this time period, in this age with forward-facing sonar, to see some of those special regulations go into effect well before we had forward-facing sonar and kind of be preemptive, if you will. It's good to see it. I'm glad to see it. I'm not against frying fish. I say it all the time on this podcast. I say it on our show. I love a fish fry. I grew up every Sunday meeting with my parents' friends, my grandparents. We'd have fish fries in the winter. My parents would have friends over. People would bring a few fish. Sometimes they'd cook venison, but it was kind of like a wild game feed fish fry. And I grew up with that. So I'm not against the family fish fry. I keep a few fish to eat. I know you do as well. But people that get so mad about these special regulation lakes, there's plenty of other lakes out there that you can fish that don't have special regulations. I can think of it for panfish, for walleyes, for bass. However, I'm the type of angler that if I want to go catch big fish, I will fish a lake that has special regulations. I know if you look back, people that were against slot limits for walleyes now are all for them. They're used to it. They see the benefits of it. And I'm telling you, man, I fish recreationally all the time where I'm not guiding. I'm not fishing with customers. I just want to go seek out a specific bite, especially when it comes to panfish. I love scrolling through my screen, going through the Onyx fish maps or the DNR creel surveys, the test net data, and I will seek out those lakes that have special regulations.
Yeah, and they've been proving to be, at least maintaining the lakes, and that's what's cool about our, state DNR is all the, we're one of the few states probably in the country that do lake surveys to, assess the health of the lakes, and they do them frequently, on the bigger lakes like Mille Lacs, Leech, and that. But the smaller lakes, it's more like once every 5 or 10 years. But it is really a good source of information to find out what's in a lake and how long ago they're there or what's coming up. And I think that's how, when we were in this panfish work group, that was kind of the deal: is what do you guys want to accomplish? What do you want us to do? Is what the DNR faculty said to us, and we're just, we started with the bluegills, we worked into the crappie barotrauma thing, and now we're, talking a little perch stuff. But the big thing was identifying lakes that still had big fish in them. So, there's a lot of lakes that, you and I could probably reflect back on a lot of lakes, Pelican Lake at Orr being one, where there used to be tons of giant bluegills and now there's not, and they just haven't come back, but there's still lakes, we fish that have them still have 10-inch bluegills, and it's like, okay, let's try putting the reg on a lake like this to see if we can keep them in the lake or slow down the harvest of them. And they did, like you said, start out as experimental lakes, and then they moved forward to being, permanently put at that regulation. And we went around and around on things to do, and a lot of, Brian, I talked to Brian Brosdahl a lot. I know you do too. And he's like a big bluegill guy, and he was always a fan of wanting to get a slot limit on a sunfish. You could say keep, if a lake had 20 bluegill limit, you can only keep 5 over 8 inches or 8.5 inches. And when we first started looking at that, there was just too much pushback from, both the enforcement and people for, having to actually measure panfish, what a pain in the butt, right? But so we're still trying to get a couple lakes like that. But then the next best thing was to reduce the bag completely. So, we kind of came to the number of 5. They had experimented with 5, and it worked at keeping the fish in the lake. So there's 10 fish limits and 5 fish limits. And the 10 fish limits are sort of there to maintain, the big fish, and the 5 fish has actually shown to increase the size of the bluegills in the lake. So that's been really interesting. And the big thing about these regs, being in place, they need to be in for a while to really assess it. The DNR gives it a 10 years of it being on a lake, and they can get a pretty good handle on what happens. So like you and I were talking earlier, some of these lakes have only had it for 2 or 3 years, but you can still catch big fish in them. So it appears to be working.
Yeah. And again, going back to that point I made about the family fish fry, I don't mind having a few fish to fry up, but I'm not keeping big bluegills and I'm not keeping big crappies. I don't keep big walleyes. I don't keep you can go down the list. And so, you know, also along those same lines of not keeping those big fish, just sort of self-policing yourself where I don't need 20 sunfish. I really don't. Like if my family's going to cook a few fish, 10's probably more than enough. Really, it really is. Or a
Mhm.
combination of 5 sunfish, 5 crappies. My personal favorite fish to eat would be perch, bluegills, walleyes, crappies, but that's kind of the order in which I prefer eating fish, in our area anyway. Um, yes,
Right, right. Go
so,
ahead.
well, all I was going to say on that is just like self-police in addition to special regulations, I think just anglers need to do more and a better job of self-policing. I know a lot of people already do. I know my son's age, like all my son's buddies, what they're really into right now is going on, Onyx maps or going on different websites and looking up different DNR information on fish. My son does it all the time on Onyx. He's constantly scrolling lakes, looking for quality panfish, and then getting a game plan to go out fishing for them. They don't keep any fish, right? So the discussion has been with him, especially throughout the winter, because my son's buddies, they don't have boats and stuff. They have little 14-foot boats that they travel around close to home, but there's a little group of them. So I say, okay, in addition to that, not keeping them, make sure that you're fishing lakes where you're not going to have tons of barotrauma. Because if you're going to fish them in the winter, no point in throwing all these fish back if they're going to be dead, right? So,
Correct.
they're really focusing in on shallow weed beds that hold fish, spots that have shallower, wintering basin fish. My son just came home yesterday or a couple days ago. It was over the weekend. They had Friday off of school. It was like in, conferences or something. And they got out early. So him and his buddies went out to a lake. He was telling me, I wasn't finding anything. And all the fish were pushed up in the corner of this basin. And I said, buddy, that's a deep lake. Usually they're deep out there. And he's like, no, Dad. He's like, they're only 10 to 15 feet down. And they were up in the corner on the edge of this basin. So for him to say that to me, I was super pumped. Here's a group of high school kids that get it when there's a lot of adults that don't understand it. And so it's cool to see. It's cool to see, they're just so geeked up about catching fish and then about catching big fish, mainly because they want to post it on Instagram, right? And social media. But to see those guys go out and chase fish on their own as high schoolers, I can relate to that. Because in high school, me and my buddies fished all the time. We tended to fish more tip-ups. Underwater cameras were sort of coming on the scene. And so I was in love with fishing underwater cameras at the time. So like every time I went out pan fishing, it was like I would only fish clear lakes where I could use my underwater camera. And so that's what I geeked up over. But to see these guys be able to catch quality panfish like we did when we were younger, because you and I reminisce about the old days all the time, how, certain lakes used to be killer and now they're not anymore. But I think the Panfish Initiative is working when now this generation's seeing the fruits of that. And it's really exciting to see to me. It's great to see. I want my son to experience quality fishing that I grew up with in northern Minnesota, and I don't want to see it go away. I want my grandkids to see that. I want their grandkids to see that as well. And, I think Quality Panfish Initiative's a start. We'll see what the data shows over 10 years, but I just know from what I'm seeing, I fish so many lakes. When I get a day off, I go fishing, right? I chase different bites. I try lakes that I haven't tried in a while. Last year, I couldn't believe the amount of lakes that had winter killed because of the amount of snow we had for 2 years, especially 2 winters ago. Um,
Right.
and to find some of those lakes that winter kill and then get left alone. Now, 3 to 4 to 5 years, I want to rediscover those lakes again. And it's interesting when you have no fishing pressure on a lake, how quickly it can bounce back. But it always seems like the bluegills are slow to the party, right? It takes for a while. The crappies are the first ones to bounce back, and then the bluegills come along the way. I
Right.
I think I think a lot of anglers in general target panfish in the winter, but then in the summer they might panfish a little bit in the spring, but then they kind of lay off them. I love fishing panfish in the summer as well. Mike, Robbie, my son, he's got a little 14-foot boat, little backwoods boat now. And I haven't had a backwoods boat for a few years. So we started it last summer. We've been dumping it in these little pothole lakes. And now with forward-facing sonar, even if a lake's not mapped, we can really break down that lake very quickly. And again, going back to special regulations, I am thankful that we have them on some of these lakes, because I could see how people could absolutely dominate these lakes year round.
For sure.
onX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Download the app today to get fisheries information in the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin, along with research tools for serious anglers and beginners alike. Filter lakes by species, trophy only, keeper fish, abundance, or all of the above. Plan which lakes to fish with the app, navigate to the accesses, and once you're there, use the onX best-in-class weather imagery and fishing hotspots to catch more fish. onX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you would never known existed. onX Fish, the app that is changing the game on ice.
Yeah, getting back to your comment on eating fish too. Yeah, I love to eat fish too. I clean plenty of fish, but you and I are sort of fortunate in that we're, with what we do for our jobs, we're out on the water a lot and we get to fish a lot. So we, get to handle more fish than a lot of people do. So I understand there will be people out there that'll be, wait a minute here, I only, get out 3 or 4 times a year and I love eating fish. So I want to keep, a bunch so I can freeze them and all that. And, I used to work at a resort when I was a kid and I saw that all the time and I get it, but it's still there's plenty of lakes out there where you can do that. You may have to settle for smaller fish, but there's plenty of lakes with 20 bluegill regs and 10 crappie, limits, and you can keep plenty of fish. So you don't need to go to these special reg lakes with the big fish, to kill all the big fish. And I think that's kind of what the idea of getting these lakes like that is to, have, I think there's 260 some now that are, 5 or 10 fish, sunfish and 5 crappie. And, how many lakes are in Minnesota? There's like 260 some that have these regs. So it gives people like you and I the opportunity to go, hey, I want to go try to catch a really nice crappie or a really nice sunfish. And, we joke around the office all the time. I always, with Jeremy Smith I work with, and he's a big muskie head. And I said, nowadays, my line to him is always catching a 10 plus inch bluegill is, similar to catching a 50-inch muskie, right? It's like they're kind of rare critters, they're pretty unique beasts in the state nowadays. So to catch one, and to me to go out and try to harvest, if you find a lake that's full of 10 and a half inch bluegills, it takes, up in the Brainerd Lakes area north, it takes 10 to 12 years to get a bluegill that big. So if you go in and just crank on them and harvest them all, you might not see them for a long time at all. So to only be able to take a handful of them helps keep those fish in the lake and helps keep the population a little more stable. And I think it's, a good opportunity for people who just like to be able to catch nicer fish, right? So
yeah. I can think of many lakes that I fish right now that don't have special regulations that are ideal for harvesting fish, right? 2 of them, like in my backyard that I fish all the time, or several that, kind of in that Brainerd Lakes, Aiken area, that I take customers to because they have an abundance of crappies, they have an abundance of bluegills, but you don't get fish in that 10-inch range very often. It seems like there's just big numbers of them. And for whatever reason, whether it's the lower food web's off or there's just too many, there's not enough predators, there's just a ton of fish. So it's a great location to go and harvest fish. I'm a guide. I'm a fishing guide. I have to provide, just like you said, you worked at a resort. a lot of my customers, they might only come fishing once a year or twice a year, and they want to harvest some fish. They want to have a fish fry when they get back to the resort, and then they want to take a few home. So I always ask customers, like, what are you looking for? Are you looking to go catch some really big ones to get a few photos and throw them back? Are you looking for a bunch of fish to keep? And if you are looking for a bunch of fish to keep, I've got some ideal lakes. There's so many of those lakes around Minnesota where they're chock full, man. I mean, I could think of areas where you can't go anywhere out in the wintering basin without seeing them on forward-facing sonar. And they're not
Right.
bad. They're not bad panfish. You know, you're talking 8, 9, 10-inch crappies. You're talking 6, 7, 8, 8.5-inch bluegills, whether it's in basins or weed beds, and they're all over the place. So I seek out those lakes. Now, I will also say that I've changed the way that I look at barotrauma, and I want to get into that with you because I know you've done an intense study on barotrauma. I've watched the videos. I know there's some debate over it, but I'm a huge believer in barotrauma. I see some of these wintering basins at the end of the year when the snow melts and there's crappies and bluegills kind of frozen at various layers in the ice. Let's talk a little bit about that. The study that you guys did on barotrauma, kind of walk our listeners through how you went about doing the study, conducting the study, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So in our, our panfish group, again, the question is what do you as stakeholders in the state with panfish want to see? And barotrauma kept coming up. Jeff Sundin, who's a guide up in the Grand Rapids area, he brought it up a number of times, and a lot of us got on board with wanting to research that. And it came up as to how could we actually study that? It's really like you and I, you're talking about, you can catch crappies deep and you see their eyes bulged out and they're bleeding from the mouth, and that something's going on. So, but how do you study that? And that was the DNR's biggest question: was can we efficiently, can we do an effective study on it, and how do we do it? And so the first year we did it, we went out on a lake up in the Longville area where we knew we could catch a lot of deep basin crappies, and they had a couple ideas with nets, net pens and everything, and different ways of releasing and catching. And it proved to them enough that they could study them. Now we got, obviously the online crowd can be cruel, and we had some lambasting, so to say, of how the study was done, but it was done as kind of a trial run. And then we did a better one last winter where we caught fish in a basin at different depths. We kept some in a net pen, released. We kept some in a net pen where we took a descending device, and the minute we right after we caught them, we'd hook this weight on and release them down at the depth they were caught at. And then the third thing we did was get some forward-facing sonar units out there. So we just followed some anglers around, had 2 different forward-facing sonar units. So we could, they would hook a fish in deep water, and we would have the 2 guys on it. So in case one lost it, and we would follow these fish on the release to see what they did when they got down there. Because I know I've had plenty of people say, well, I caught this fish in 30 feet of water and I let it go and it swam away fine, but you really don't know what happened. So it was interesting to see that some of the fish would swim down to depth and join the group and seemed to be okay. And a lot of the fish would swim down 5 feet, 6 feet, then they'd pop back up. They'd try to go again, and pretty soon they were under the ice. And then some other ones just swam right to the bottom and died. They were so screwed up. So I guess the long and short of what we came across with, or what I came away with the study was, there is an effect of barotrauma on killing fish, especially crappies, who are, what are kind of more sensitive fish in deep water. And that, that kind of over-under depth where things start to happen seems to be in that 25 to 30 foot range, where some will survive, but some won't. But once you got over catching them 30 feet down or more, the deeper you caught them, the more severe the barotrauma and the less likely they were to survive. So the bottom line from this wasn't to try to ban forward-facing sonar to find them, or to try to ban people from doing this. All we wanted to come away with is what's happening with these fish so that we could educate anglers and say, hey, you're going to go out on this lake. There's a 45-foot basin. That's where the crappies are in the lake, right? Everybody knows about it. The fish are 30 to 35 feet down. If you go catch them, have fun, go catch them, keep your limit and get out. Don't sit there and say I caught 30 and released 20 and kept 10. Just go catch your fish. Get your limit of crappies, consider it a kill run. You're going to, have a meal of fish. And then if you want to go catch more fish for fun, go somewhere else on the lake or a different lake and fish shallow where you're not killing the fish. But, the bottom line is I think what it proved is that there is mortality at depth for crappies. So and that was kind of a big thing for us in the group to get an answer on, right?
No, I find both barotrauma studies that you did that were conducted to be super intriguing. I've changed the way that I fish, man. I tell you what, you and I talked on the phone before the podcast. I was seeking out different lakes where I had to take various groups out fishing this year. And, these lakes always cycle. I had talked about, lakes that are absolutely chock full of fish. Well, they change from lake to lake, right? Those lakes kind of get fished out. So you're seeking new ones. I can't tell you how many scenarios now with forward-facing sonar, when I see fish 30 feet or below, I don't target them. We found a lake this year. It was chocked full of fish, 30 feet to 42 feet. Absolutely, you couldn't fit more crappies in that zone. And I told Pete, who I guide with, I'm like, dude, we can't come here. I mean, we have a bunch of guys that want to go out and just catch fish and keep a few to fry up, but they just want to have an all-day event. It's supposed to be somewhat of a warm day. They want a whole hop. We can't come here. We will kill so many crappies if we come here. And so we just left. And we went and seeked out a different lake. We found another lake that shallower basin. It was only like 22 feet deep. Most of the fish were 12 to 17 feet down. But if you think earlier in this winter in general, we haven't had a ton of snow. So those lakes were hard to fish because you could not get on top of those crappies, right? The deeper fish weren't moving as much. They were easier to target. So we went to this lake. What I found is these really clear bodies of water, they're hard to get on them, especially those shallow basins. These lakes that have a little more color, especially when there's no snow, easier to get up on top of those fish. And so now, we're seeking fish much shallower. I don't fish basins. Even if I'm going to harvest them, I don't fish these fish that are deeper in the basin, even if I'm marking them down low, right? I fish a lot of times where we use forward facing to find them, but then I run around with my 2D sonar, drop it on top of them. If I'm seeing fish down below 30 feet, I keep going. I'm looking for those schools that are up high. And as an angler that is looking, if you're really looking for bigger crappies, a lot of times they're up in the water column. Those big fish aren't near the bottom. Those tend to be smaller year classes. Not always, but a lot of times that's the case. You see these smaller year classes, these smaller crappies, bluegills kind of mixed in closer to the bottom, and these bigger ones are suspended, oftentimes not in the bigger schools. They're just roaming by themselves or with a pair. And so trying to target those fish higher in the water column is all I do nowadays. That's my sole focus. I stick to shallow water basins, and I'm trying to target fish that are a little bit higher in the water column. As we get towards spring here, you're seeing a lot of fish. And as the snow melts and the oxygen levels are going to start to rise now with this rain and this warm up, you're going to see these fish rise way up in the water column. And they're very challenging to get on top of because a lot of times just walking or dragging your sled, you're going to spook those fish. And so you got to kind of get that strategy of how we're going to go about catching them, pinching them in corners of basins or somewhere that's a little bit shallower. But another good place that gets overlooked a lot of times because we get a lot of snow and the weeds and the vegetation die off is shallow water weed beds. I tend to find bigger panfish in these weed beds. And this year with little or no snow, a lot of the vegetation is nice and green and it looks great. I love hunting down fish with all sorts of different technology, but nothing cooler than grabbing an underwater camera and dropping it down in a weed bed and locating giant panfish, bass, everything. I love doing that this time of year.
I'm with you 100%. We were just talking about that here in the office with all the guys, and it's like around the Brainerd Lakes area here, there's a lot of those lakes that are moderate depth, fairly clear and have really lush weed beds. And like you said, this year with the lack of snow, the weeds, there's, you can go out there now and they're still green, right? And I've found my best bites around here for panfish in the wintertime in, 8 to 12 foot weed beds. And like you say, the cool thing about sunfish and crappies, or not as much crappies, but sunfish and bass especially, and they all are together in these weed beds, but they're curious fish, and like dropping a camera down, actually they come look at it, right? I'm sure you've seen that 100 times, but it's like that's the cool thing about fishing the weeds is, one, you're not going to kill fish for barotrauma. Two, there's usually the bigger bluegills are in those areas, and then three, the camera doesn't lie, so you still have to get them to bite, right, and not scare them, but you can just keep cutting across a weed bed and putting the camera down, and if you don't see them, they're not there. And then when you see them, when you see a few, more often than not, you're going to run into a bunch of them, and then then you can just kind of camp down on those weed beds as the fish move around and have a really fun time, catching fish.
I think two of my favorite pan fishing bites throughout the winter months would be fishing with an underwater camera and in a weed bed or a shallow basin or whatever, but fishing with that underwater camera. And then two would have to be sight fishing. This time of year, when oxygen levels rise and you start sight fishing, let's say around wild rice or in vegetation or wherever, not only are you getting the bluegills, the bass, the pike, the crappies into those areas, but a lot of times they're right underneath the ice. And so sitting over the top of them, super still, and watching them come through, I can't think of a more thrilling bite than that. And they're aggressive. They go from these really stiff kind of staring contest fish out in the basin to super aggressive. Crappies come flying in wide open. Sometimes you don't even see them strike. It's just like instantaneous to, just these aggressive creatures. And it's cool to watch them. I mean, it's like staring down an aquarium. There's 2 or 3 lakes that, last year with the kind of the rapidly deteriorating ice that we had in March, we didn't get that really late ice cool bite that we typically get. Whereas I'm hoping this year, even though it's rapidly warming up, we have enough ice out there that I think we're going to be able to experience it.
Yeah. I know if for anybody who hasn't done that, it is pretty cool. You're literally dropping a jig, a bigger plastic or a jig down, 2 feet under the ice, and you can just stand up and look down the hole, and you basically just wait for your jig to disappear, right?
So yeah, it's fun. And there's varying degrees of it. If again, in stained water, they're not quite as spooky, but they can be. I mean, even in stained water. In clear water, highly recommend just getting a flip over or something that you can put over the top of your head. I've even done it where I just drop my line down and I put my coat over the top of my head and I'm just staring down the hole, trying not to spook those fish. I've had bluegills and perch. I've never had a crappie do this, but I've had bluegills and perch actually come up into the hole to strike it. We had last year.
It's crazy.
Last year with the all the rain and runoff we had. Remember, we had some rain in January and then again in February. We had a day where it was like the holes were kind of like toilet bowling. And I literally would drop my spoon down in the hole and perch were coming up through the hole and striking my bait. It was so cool. I was trying to film it on my cell phone so many times. And it was like I kept on missing it, but they were actually coming right up in the hole and grabbing the bait. It's just awesome. Only happens this time of year, right? Only happens that late ice time period. For the most part, it's a real short window on that bite, and I'm looking forward to it. That bite's upon us right now. I'm not saying that I'm wishing the ice season to end, but I am kind of really welcoming this warm weather, welcoming the snowpack to melt, kind of that ice to get a little bit honeycombed. I'm ready for it, man. I love late ice conditions. And of course, I am looking forward towards spring. I love spring fishing. Mike,
Yeah, this time of the year it goes quick, doesn't it? So
it happens so fast. I mean, I've had so many times where I've been on the ice one day, the next day or 2 days later, you're in the boat, you're fishing, or you're fishing from a ditch, catching them in the shallow water area while there's still ice out on the lake. I've had it where I've been fishing, I go with my Uncle Gary all the time. He likes finding these little backwater channels or areas that, cattails or bulrush channels. He calls it ditch fishing, where these fish will slide up into those shallows, even though there's still ice on the lake. And I've had it where I've been ice fishing one day, the next day I was ditch fishing. So that time frame is coming quick.
yeah, for sure.
So
I know one thing we talked about earlier too, and it's another issue that's come up quite a bit in our panfish work group, and something you're all too familiar with, is the use of forward-facing sonar in fishing in general, but especially in panfish. And we sort of brought it up a little bit more when we were doing the barotrauma study, because it was pretty, integral in us finding the fish. And it was kind of interesting because a lot of the DNR staff we worked with are fishermen, but they weren't really up. This was 2 or 3 years ago now, weren't up to speed on what it was. So it was kind of a twofold. It helped us do the study, but it was also good to expose these biologists to this kind of technology so they know what's coming, on the horizon. And now we're here. But it was, I will say, and I'm a fan of it. I use it. We're sponsored by Humminbird. They make a great unit and they find fish, but it is a deadly technology, and it's one that you want. The policing yourself thing comes into play. But we were able, you've done it 100 times, but like there's certain areas where it's kind of tough to use. But the basin crappies, especially, that was where our biggest concern was. Is that I gave the example that I could, with a combination of forward-facing sonar and information, whether it's from friends or social media on a hot lake, I can go to a lake having never fished it. I can start cutting holes out in the basin with forward-facing sonar. And it's not if I find the crappies, it's when, right? You will find them. And I'm sure you've done it 100 times, but I was just kept wanting to get that point across that, now with this technology coming on, it's going to open it up to way more anglers if they get knowledgeable on using it, how it'll could impact fishing in the future with finding fish like that so easily.
Well, and that's why I like these experimental regulation lakes, because now you can see the difference between those lakes and then lakes that don't have that regulation and how they fluctuate, because the technology is only going to get better. I know there's a lot of debate out there. People love it. People hate it. Me personally, I embrace technology. I kind of look at it like when underwater cameras came out, people are saying, ban underwater cameras. It's going to ruin fishing. It's going to kill everything. It didn't. Mapping technology. When it came out, oh my gosh, all these old guides, because, when I started guiding, mapping technology really kind of came on the scene. All these old guides would tell me, man, you wouldn't be able to catch anything if it weren't for maps, and it's going to change fishing. And it has changed fishing, right? We set slot limits and regulations as a result of it. 2D sonar got better. Side imaging got better and better and better. Now we have forward-facing sonar. That technology is only going to get better as far as clarity, the distance out you're going to see. These companies aren't just going to pull back and decide, oh, okay, well, we're satisfied with our forward-facing sonar units. It's only going to get better, as the market continues to grow and get educated about it. It's going to become just mainstream use. Look at talking earlier about my sons and their buddies. They don't go out fishing without forward-facing sonar. But I would tell those kids anywhere where I'm fishing, because I know they're going to throw them back. They're going to be, they police themselves, right? And so having these special regulation lakes is huge, because I want to see the difference between these lakes and then the lakes that don't have them. I took the DNR, like you, Mike, I took the DNR out, showed them forward-facing sonar on my boat. And Greg Berg, he's the Mille Lacs area fisheries, the specialist for the lake. He's all for it. Matter of fact, the DNR has purchased a couple of units. As you know, you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about the work groups just relating to technology, right? Jeremy Smith's on that group.
Yeah.
I want to see those discussions and dialogues continue, because if we just look the other way and say, there's only a handful of people using it. The technology is not good enough. Most people don't understand it. And just keep making excuses. Pretty soon we're going to realize, hey, everyone has it. Now we're late to the party to set regulation.
Right. And that's sort of what came up in our group too, was, the awareness of it. But the DNR guys I work with, they, made it clear. They're just like, look, we're not out to ban people. That's the first thing people think, because we're doing reduced, we're doing these different regs and stuff, and we're eventually going to ban forward facing sonar. So there's a lot of pro anglers and pro forward facing sonar people that were really down on us when we did the barotrauma study, because we were using forward facing sonar so much. And those guys are like, that's not the case at all. We're not in the mode of canceling out, making forward facing sonar illegal. We really can't do that. But what we can do is, if it gets out of hand on our end, is we can just keep reducing bag limits, which, we already have lakes like that. But if it gets way out of hand, we might just have to do more reduction of bag limits. And then, the unfortunate side of that is, when you do that, you're punishing people that don't use it, right? That just fish conventionally. And then if you're getting, all kinds of reduced bag limits everywhere. But I'm just hoping that people can, embrace the technology. They don't have to love it or hate it and go out there and use it, but just use it responsibly. Like the line I always like to use is, with great power comes great responsibility, right? You've got this great, powerful tool at your hand, at your fingertips. You learned how to use it. You learn how to find fish with it. Now use it responsibly. Don't go out and just, take, your 8 buddies out and go to a basin crappie lake and find them and go keep 80 crappies, right? Just kind of, that's the kind of stuff that'll give it a black eye. So just use it responsibly, so that it'll be telling to see in the future here, if as anglers we can actually do that or not, right? Because it's once, I bring up the story of you when we did the lunch show at Winnie that time, and you caught all the fish the one day, and then the next day we didn't use the forward facing sonar, and we still got a great show out of it, but it really changed your perspective on fishing a little bit that day.
Well, that's I got a couple I have daily examples where forward facing sonar.
Yeah.
I love hunting down fish. I like finding fish. Fishing is about discovery, right? Figuring them out from day to day to day. Their patterns change daily. Their patterns change hourly. I've learned so much as an angler over the last 2 years, and I don't want to say my lifetime, but just how they relate to structure, how they don't relate to structure, areas that I never looked before. I'm looking now, and I'm finding, fish that are right below the ice. I'm finding fish that are just below the surface in the summer. I'm finding giant bass out in the basin that I thought were always in the weeds and were ambush predators. No, they're pelagic, man. There's big walleyes out there. There's crappies, bluegill, you name it. I've learned so much because of forward facing sonar. And every single day when I go out fishing and I have that sonar unit, I love discovery, right?
Right.
That's
the funnest part of it.
Filming a dialed in angling. We went out to a pothole lake that wasn't mapped. I've never fished it before. The guy I was with was a buddy of mine. He knew there was big walleyes, tons of perch in this pothole lake. And the thing was probably 500 acres, 400 acres. Wasn't huge. We broke that thing down in half a day and still shot an episode even after we found them, just because of forward facing sonar, and we were driving home the next day. Shooting TV, how difficult that would have been 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so I love the discovery portion of it. But again, you've got to use and police yourself, and police as anglers, other anglers out there. We have to all kind of band together and say, hey, technology's here to stay. This technology is only going to get better. I can't imagine the next few generations of forward-facing sonar. What's it going to look like in 10 years, Mike? If you look back 10 years ago on your sonar, you'd be hard-pressed to fish with it. Touching upon, your exact statement, what we said about the Lund shoot. We shot a Lund. I'll just kind of back up for listeners. We shot a Lund TV show, the Ultimate Fishing Show for Lund. The day before, I had been scouting in my own boat with forward-facing sonar, and this was a couple years ago. But, I mean, I was cranking on them. I was throwing plastics and just whaling, like one after another, right? All sizes of fish. I was picking out big ones. And at the time on Winnebagosh, there was, and there still is, this giant year class of fish that are all about the same size. Right now, they're all, let's say, 16 to 19 inches. But then there was a ton of, I would say, 12 to 15 inches, right, Mike?
Right.
Yeah, so there was tons of these little rats, I would consider rats, everywhere in the lake. But we wanted to target some big fish for the show. So we ran around, and the conditions the next day had changed. It was dead flat calm. We were still trying to get them on the paddle tails, and we weren't catching them at the rate that I was catching them with forward-facing sonar. And I felt like my hands were tied because we were in a different boat, one of Lund's brand new boats, and it didn't have it on there. And so to see the difference between my fishing day the day before, when I had forward-facing sonar, and the day after when I didn't have it, we still caught plenty of fish, but it was night and day difference. Now that I've had forward-facing sonar and I use it as much as I do, I have a challenging time going back. Yes, there's times where I don't like using it. I love throwing topwater, right? Not guiding, but just like with my kids on the pontoon or in my son's boat. I love throwing topwater for largemouth bass, for smallmouth bass. I don't care about forward-facing sonar. I just want to fish. I also love fishing vegetation, let's say for largemouth or even walleyes, pitching in where I'm pitching in working areas. If I don't have forward-facing sonar, I can power fish a lot of different areas and be completely successful. However,
yeah. Well, I was going to say in hindsight too, like if you had looked at the day we filmed the show without forward-facing sonar, if you had a day like that pre-forward-facing sonar, you'd be like, yeah, it was not a bad day of fishing, right? We did pretty good, but now the goalposts have been moved on because of that. So I mean, we still caught, I don't know, filming hard. We probably caught 15 or 20 walleyes, which was, I thought, pretty good day. But you caught 50 the day before, so that was the perspective of it, right? So
yeah, exactly. And along those same lines of fishing without it now, yes, I can do it, and it's fine. I don't mind it. There's some anglers that just won't fish at all without it. And I will do it. I think it's still fun. I still love casting. I can think of this fall, Robbie and I going out, and it was late fall. We had such a warm October. We went out pan fishing along the lily pads and along the cabbage. There was a really stark drop off on this one weed line, right? And the fish kind of relate to it. I think what happens in the fall, they come up and as long as the weeds are still green, they relate to it. And then at night, they probably slip out into the basin and then they come back up during the day. Well, this was a warm afternoon and we were catching crappies and bluegills one after another, just pitching them along the edge of the weed line there. The lily pads and the coontail that were up. I don't mind fishing like that. I love bobber fishing in the spring. I don't need the forward-facing sonar every waking moment. However, when I'm guiding and conditions are changing, or if I'm just out in my big boat, I always have it down, either on my trolling motor or on an arm. I'm always utilizing that technology because I want to know. It's discovery. I can't tell you how many times I've caught fish that I would have never known were there. But most of the time, I'm returning those fish to the lake, especially the big ones. And so again, I don't want to get too far off topic with forward-facing sonar, but it's here to stay. And so,
no, I had a kind of neat little story. My dad, my dad's 84. He still likes going out fishing. He can't get around as much as he used to, and he lives on a lake between Mille Lacs and Brainerd, and I go over there every first ice with them and get him out there. And he still has the jiggle sticks that I built when I was like in high school. So, a busted rod, a dowel, a couple pegs, and wrap the line. That's all he wants to use. So there's a crappie spot on his lake. They're there every year. It's shallow, and I drag his butt out there to catch crappies, and I show up with a sled load of equipment, and he walks out with a bucket, 2 rods, and a pail of minnows. And he catches just as many fish as I do out there. And I have people walk up when he's fishing and they're like, what are those? The younger kids. And I'm like, this is how we used to fish when we had nothing. That was it. You'd go to a spot and you would drop a bobber down on a rod like that and catch fish. So you guys, I always tell the younger guys, like, your son Robbie and some of the young guides we get coming in here, you guys don't, you were born into a generation where this technology was already there. So you're already 10 steps ahead of where we were when we were fishing, trying to figure things out. And it sounds like the old guy talking about the good old days, but it still is. I still enjoy seeing my dad catching crappies hand over hand, pulling them up onto the ice. It's really fun. So,
well, and fishing's supposed to be what you make of it or what you want out of it. Like some people for fishing, they want to kick back and relax. And for ice fishing, maybe they want to sit in a wheelhouse or they want to sit in a portable. I have customers that come out with me and they say, hey, we're not ice trolling, man. We are relaxing. We're not running around chasing fish. Try to get us into an area where the fish are coming through. If we can catch a few fish and have our company meeting inside the wheelhouse, that's what we want out of it. So I always ask customers, like, what do you expect out of it? I know me growing up like you, I had jiggle sticks. I would sit out in front of my parents' place. I would fish along the break line until the sun came up. If I didn't catch a walleye, I would slide out a little bit deeper and try to catch some crappies and perch and walleyes out just a little bit deeper off the break line. That was my day. I had a lawn chair, 2 jiggle sticks. But then it wasn't until I got up to Winnebagosh and I saw these guys drilling holes with gas augers. And there would be 5 deep and they would drill across an entire structure like Raven's Bar, Sugar Bar. And there would be 5 of us behind them with jiggle sticks and big spoons. And we hit the bottom, lift it up. If you didn't get a perch, you'd keep moving. That's where ice trolling was born for me. And the discovery factor of fishing to me is what makes it fun. That's why I ice troll in the winter. That's why I like using forward-facing sonar. In the summer, discovering areas of the lake that I never fished before. I have fallen in love with shallow water basin fish that are completely pelagic. I've fallen in love with shallow water weed beds, coontail that I didn't know existed, deeper weed lines that I didn't know existed. All of the discovery that I get out of forward-facing sonar fuels the passion that I have for angling. So with that, Mike, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thanks for the work that you do on the work group. I love these quality panfish initiatives. If you've never experienced fishing some of these lakes that have special regulations, I highly recommend it. I think Minnesota, out of the Midwest in where we live, I think Minnesota, we have a lot of great fisheries right in our own backyard, and I don't want to see them go away. You don't know what you have until it's gone. People have written songs about it. I don't want to see things disappear that I enjoy. This is why I live in Minnesota. This is why I live in central and northern Minnesota, so I can experience this. I love seeing my son, Robbie, my daughter, going out, experiencing things that I did and like we did when we were kids. So, Mike, thanks again for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, had a great time, Tony. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Hey, stay tuned. We're going to talk more ice headlines, ice conditions, and kind of the state of the state when we come back on the Dialed In Angling podcast.
The Dialed In Angling podcast is brought to you by St. Croix Rods, handcrafting the best rods on earth for an elevated angling experience since 1948. St. Croix Rods are truly a world-class brand that has earned the respect and admirations of anglers across the planet. I trust St. Croix Rods, and you should too. Check them out at stcroixrods.com.
An unexpected fall into cold water can turn tragic in almost an instant, even for the best of swimmers. As the weather warms up and the ice thaws, make sure you get home safe by always wearing a life jacket and ice picks when recreating on cold water. If you fall in, put your arms on the ice, kick your feet, and roll away from the hole. The best plan is to always go with a buddy and let someone know when you will return. Safety is always in season. A message from the Minnesota DNR.
Okay, welcome back. I want to just touch on some ice headlines, some ice conditions that are changing very quickly. Obviously, we've had a great winter, probably the best ice conditions winter that we've had in at least 3 years. So having said that, I think now as we get into March and things are warming up very rapidly, we saw at the end of February, things literally go from 30 below to 3 days later, we are almost at 50 above. As those things start to occur, things start to heat up, the sun starts to get more power, you're starting to see some shorelines erode. I know ice conditions are going to be very different from the southern end of the state to the northern end of the state. And so just using caution as you're ice fishing here in March. There's a lot of great opportunity to still get out and take advantage of some of these great bites like we talked about in the podcast, the sight fishing bite, the shallow water weed bed bite, using underwater cameras to locate fish. Those are all great bites that you can accept, that you can usually access fairly close to the shorelines. And that's why I tend to do them this time of year, is because a lot of it involves me walking out. But I'm getting back into the time frame where I'm using spud bars again. I'm relying on using my float suit. I'm taking precautions as I get into ice, as I get into ice situations. Just because I was driving a week ago doesn't mean I can still drive on the ice. Yes, there's areas in northern Minnesota where you still might be driving. You may go up to Lake of the Woods and fish and drive your truck out and even pull a wheelhouse out still. But then you get on a small lake that has lots of cattails around it, and maybe somebody had a fish house in a location or a spear shack or somewhere where you're finding areas that have little or no ice, especially after this rainfall. We've got rain and snow. You're really going to have to lean back on using the spud bars, the float suits, getting back into those areas where you're checking ice conditions as you're walking out or even driving ATVs or snowmobiles or what have you. And I know there's a lot of ice anglers out there like, wow, it's fine, I was just out there yesterday. I have personally encountered deteriorating ice conditions in a lot of locations, but I'm still drilling holes in some areas with extensions, right? Or I'm drilling holes and it's right up to the motor on my Strike Master. So there's going to be that variation. However, if you're doing it right, there's lots of opportunities out there to get out there and take advantage of this warm weather as we still have it. The cool part about this time of year is, yes, it may warm up during the day, but a lot of times our nighttime lows are getting below freezing. So it'll lock things up a little bit for you so you can get to the ice and then kind of experience light ice. Now, if you're going out over the next few weeks, obviously walleyes in inland waters are closed, but there's some key bites that I think you should really take note of, right? If you're looking for some cool ice fishing adventures. One, anywhere out in the Dakotas right now, you start to get to North Dakota, Devil's Lake, there's this reemergence of really good walleye and perch fishing, right? These pothole lakes are chock full. And as oxygen levels start to rise, the fish start to bite like crazy. And the fish catching is incredible. Same with South Dakota. However, talking to my friends, Marcus Quam, they're losing ice pretty rapidly. It sounds like anything in South Dakota right now is walking, ATV, maybe if you can get on the ice, but just keeping that in mind. Whereas in North Dakota, yes, they're having warm temperatures as well, but the nighttime lows are there. So I like to call to the resorts, get some fishing tips, some ice condition reports from the people that are at the resorts. They're going to be 100% honest with you as far as the bite, the ice conditions. You're going to get filled in before you head there. Another location, Lake of the Woods. There's a lot up at Lake of the Woods on the Minnesota side, on the Canadian side, that you can still experience. You can go catch walleyes right now. They're catching jumbo perch. They're catching crappies, even on the U.S. side, but especially on the Canadian side. And then, of course, those giant pike. If you've never experienced catching giant pike on Lake of the Woods, it's something to see, man. There is absolute monsters to be caught up there right now. I have some friends up there that were just up there last week, putting out tip-ups, jigging for monster pike. That time frame is upon us. Another pike kind of bite that is sort of new to the state because it's new to regulations is Mille Lacs Lake. They've extended the pike season on Mille Lacs Lake so you can experience pike. Now, Mille Lacs has a lot of ice on it right now, but as this ice deteriorates, those pikes start to shift into the shoreline. They're getting ready to spawn. So they're going to move in the bays. They're going to move in these shallow water break lines, anywhere where you can find vegetation, even some of these feeder creeks that come in. Watch the current areas, but getting out onto that big ice sheet and then putting tip-ups down, jig fishing, even sight fishing for those pike is pretty incredible. And what also is cool in those areas, you're going to get a lot of jumbo perch. So bring your perch rods. That bite is still taking place. Other than that, things are starting to change pretty rapidly. Me, personally, I'm focused on perch and panfish right now. Like we talked about in the podcast, I really love sight fishing, so that's right on my radar. I'm going to make sure I hit a sight fishing bite prior to ending my ice season. I'm really focused on perch right now. With the last few days, with the warm-up, the perch fishing has gotten much better. Even last weekend with the cool down, perch fishing slowed down. I was up north. I was fishing around Winnie. We did okay on the perch. We caught some crappies, went to Mille Lacs Lake. It was okay, right? We put perch in the bucket, but you could see them down there. They weren't that aggressive. As soon as it warmed up earlier this week, the perch went nuts again. You're going to see that as we get into the weekend, as we get into next week. The perch bite is still out there to be had, but I can't stress enough using extreme caution as we move forward here. Ice conditions are going to change pretty rapidly. I remember growing up on the lake as a kid, and anytime we had nighttime lows that never got below freezing, or rain, wind, or any of those combo of three, the ice conditions changed very, very quickly. You add lakes that have current into the mix or neck down areas that water can pass through, those things are going to change rapidly. So just use extreme caution. If you can get up on the ice sheet and do it so safely, there's a lot of ice fishing still yet to be had in March. So I hope you're getting out, taking advantage of this warm weather. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. If you haven't checked it out, check out our Red Lake episode, catching giant crappies on Red Lake. That was a fun experience. That's a bite that disappeared, but now is back. I would love to see people use extreme discretion, throwing those giant crappies back. If you're going to harvest a couple, fine, keep a few of the smaller ones, but don't fill buckets of these beasts. They're absolute specimens. I'm telling you, they're built differently than most crappies that you will see anywhere in the Midwest, sometimes, and a lot of locations anywhere across our nation. These things are an absolute special specimen. So I'm hoping and I'm praying that people just throw those fish back if you catch them, take a few pictures, but experience it. The crappies are back. They're in pretty good numbers. You can catch them in a lot of locations. Check out Dialed In Angling, giant Red Lake crappies, or giant crappies on Red Lake on YouTube. Check it out. Thanks again for tuning in to the podcast. Stay tuned next week. We're going to have a full lineup. We're going to talk state of the state ice conditions. We've also got the Northwest Sports Show in Minneapolis. I'm going to interview a few people down there. Start thinking about fishing in the boat, because just like you, I've got spring fever. I'm going to ice fish for hopefully a few more weeks, and then I cannot wait to get the boat in the water. So until next week, I'm Tony Roach. This has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast.